We're going to be continuing on from lesson 9 in this lesson, where I'm trying to finalize and polish off this kind of sci-fi spaceshipy design that I've got going here. Now, as you're aware of, I wasn't fully happy with where things got to in the previous lesson in terms of being able to fully finish and clean everything. So what I'm going to do in this lesson is I'm going to be a little bit more quiet at the start of the lesson, because I feel like I've explained pretty well now what I'm doing while I'm making those small adjustments and cleaning, and I don't need to continue to kind of break that down for you, at least not in this particular lesson. We will go back onto that on a different subject, but you've seen it enough now where I just need to get that out of the way, and I don't really feel good at all about hiding anything from you guys. So I'm going to work as fast as I can, just kind of polishing off some bits and pieces. Then I'll, like I wanted to in the last lesson, collapse the mesh off and just show you how you can do those final little enhancements that are going to give the mesh its proper scale and its proper final quality. Usually when you go in and add those small details, a lot of the smaller imperfections begin to fade away because the eye's too busy noticing all that extra detail to pay attention to those small things. But depending on how much time you have from model to model, it's probably a good idea to kind of evaluate just how far you want to go cleaning everything. Now, if this was a personal model, and back in the day, I probably would have been creating something like this very quickly, so I would have been a lot more in the zone and I would have been able to get to this point a bit quicker. So I do feel pretty good though that as the course is going on, the pieces are getting more complex, and my goal is to keep that progression happening so that as the course continues, you're starting to do some pretty advanced stuff. Now, I did get more emails from the last lesson than I have in all the others combined about, people finally seeing the benefits of the course, and that makes me really happy to continue trying to create these detailed lessons, even though I know they're a little bit long, but I'm just trying to cram as much information in them as possible so that by the time the course is finished, there's not any leftover questions. And sometimes that can mean just sitting down and watching some boring modeling. But I really hope you're enjoying it, and by the end of this lesson, it will be a lot more detail on the mesh and it will be a lot more clean. So I'll get started right away and try and just hold off a little bit until I get to that later stage about breaking down things for you personally. So you can see here, I'm just going to have to add in another support loop in between. I just want to make sure things are even. But I'm not going to collapse this particular piece straight away. The piece I'm going to collapse first will be this one here. So before I do that, I'm going to separate the pieces one by one and work on those, because I don't like collapsing everything at once. The reason for that being is that when you, for example, if I put on the turbo smooth here and collapse it like this, you can see we're getting a very detailed, or a very overly detailed mesh to work from. Now, one of the things I like doing when collapsing down is going in and finding edge loops that don't add any kind of curvature to the mesh. So you can see here we've got an edge loop that's running perfectly flat, and if I did collapse this mesh, I could select those types of loops like here and in between here and get rid of them. But before I collapse everything, I want to get a feel for how many loops I have to remove on one object, and then I'll continue that removal on the other pieces. So this is still all one piece at the moment, but I'm going to end up breaking that apart. You can see there's some pretty messy piece. There's a pretty messy piece in here. So in order to fix that, what I'm going to do is I always like to just kind of select a few vertices, move them around, and figure out kind of what's going on, and then I'll start spacing them properly. But I really don't like how we've got a really sharp and pointy shape just kind of terminating into nowhere. And it looks like we get away with it from out back here, but I'm sure once I get to the rendering stage, that type of cleanliness doesn't hold up so well. So that could be something I need to fix at a higher subdiv value. For example, if I collapsed here, I'd be able to select those edge loops and just push them down. But I'll try and fix that before it gets to that stage. See, it's quite a lot of messiness here that was just preventing me from getting that looking good. Got some overlapping geometry that I'm just fixing up. So in a situation like this where it's very difficult to clean up, sometimes I'll just cut my losses and select the edge ring leading up to that polygon, and I'll just delete it just completely. I've actually ended up selecting too much though, so you need to be careful about that. Okay, so here's a good point where I can actually just separate this. Now, as usual, I can just select the top two modifiers on the stack and copy them, and then just paste them to this new object, and that will paste that across. The reason I'm doing this is because what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can visibly see what I'm working with here. Now, I know you can go in and make a polygon selection and hide the polygons inside, but I don't like doing that. I always like to kind of separate things per element and work on them on that type of basis. So I'm just going to select this edge and get rid of it. And I'm just going to bridge these points so that I recreate that connection. But just before I do, I can select the polygons down here because you can see they're overlapping a bit incorrectly. So I'm just going to fix that by eye. And I won't lie, this is one of the problems when you're designing stuff in real time. Trying to make sure that things just all fit together is probably one of the more time-consuming tasks. But you do get better in practice, and if I was sitting here modeling every day, it probably wouldn't have gotten to this point. However, it almost is good for me to show you what this looks like, because if I just showed you how to work with things that were completely perfect, there wouldn't exactly be that learning curve there. You'd probably sit there and struggle and wonder, why does his stuff look so good and why is mine so messy? So this is part of the modeling phase that I went through, trying to dig in and really focus on creating clean meshes and absorbing a lot of that time that went into it. Because I definitely in my earlier models had this issue all the time. Now that, like I said, it does go away after a bit of practice. Now I'm unselecting the edges on the side. And I can just bridge these. So we're a little bit cleaner now. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better, and it gives me the opportunity to fix this at a higher subdivision. Just going to continue to clean this piece, just kind of selecting the edges one by one and moving them into place. Okay, so here we get to a point where I'm happy with the edge loop. I'm happy with how the edge loop looks down here in terms of how it's smoothing, but up the top I'm not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unselect all these edge loops and then hit Control Remove, and that's going to give me a new flat surface up the top here to work with. And what I can do from here is I can reselect that edge loop and connect it by right-clicking on those I'm resetting, and now I can just re-snap that. So what that's doing is I'm not affecting all of these vertices down here, but I am continuing this up into a perfectly flat upper piece, and now you can see it's smoothing quite nicely. I can technically, if I were to clean this without relying on a higher subdivision, I can just slide this edge loop up. And you can see what that does, kind of as it slides up, you're creating a little bit of a pinch around this area. But I just prefer, because I know I am going to collapse this at a higher res, I just prefer to wait and just do it at that stage. Okay, so you can see from here, it's going quite wide and then all of a sudden it's going thin. I need to constantly fix things like that and make sure that things are smoothing in nice and evenly. So we're going from large to small, not just, as you can see, it was going from quite large, still quite large, then we go really small up here. So I'm just trying to even those edges out. If you ever see me quickly redo a selection that I just unselected, I'm just using Control Y to do that. It's just the typical max hotkey. I don't think I even explained that yet in the lessons. But sometimes, I accidentally unselect and then I just want to reselect that. So I just use Control Y. Now, because these pieces in the center here are less polished, I'm just going to hide those for the time being and work on the pieces that are actually working quite nicely. For this particular piece, I'm going to detach this also at this stage, and I still do have the modifiers from previously that I previously had copied in the stack there, so I can just paste that back over as usual. And I'm just going to hide that as well. Just a bit of topology redirection going on down there. And I still don't know exactly how I want this piece to look underneath here. So this is where I'll just do a little bit of experimentation, try and clean things up, and if I'm ever in doubt about how I want things to look, 9 out of 10 times I'll probably reduce the level of detail first. That doesn't mean the piece is going to end up with less detail, but when you've got situations like this here where you've got multiple shapes kind of flowing and blending into each other, it becomes very tricky to get an elegant solution to that in terms of getting more detail embedded in while keeping that edge flow continuity. So that's where I'll go in and just try and simplify it as a general rule of thumb, and if it's looking good after I've simplified it, then I'll have another crack at adding some detail again. So it's a kind of back and forth process in terms of getting that final result you're happy with. So now you can see I've got an opportunity, since we've added that piece underneath here, where what I can do is I can go in, and this is what I mean about adding more detail. I can go in underneath here and connect all the way until the end, and you'll see what I'm about to do is we've got this other piece of geometry here that's not terminating that well. So what I can do is I can remove that edge loop. I'm going to connect a piece on the center here, and like that little trick I showed you earlier, I'm going to extrude it inwards and then get rid of the outside loop. So now that piece is going in, and what we've got now is we've got an opportunity to connect those, keep everything four-sided while blending in some complex shapes in a really elegant solution. There's one little pinch going on here that I'm going to try and fix, and in order to do that, I just need to redirect the topology flow. So you can see we've got some loops kind of flowing along in this direction. So I'm just going to take a quick look at it, kind of visualize how I want to fix things. You can see if I connect a loop down like that, I can select in the center. I'm going to unselect that last piece, connect down, and actually always make sure, you can see here, it's kind of a habit of mine, you might not realize it, but that's quite a subconscious thing. I've zoomed in here and made that connection, and one of the first things I did is I zoomed out. Now the reason I zoomed out is because it's quite a common mistake in terms of not realizing that you've selected kind of some unneeded edges. So that's why you'll see if I ever zoom in, I'm zooming in to make sure that when I do make the connection, it's at the right distance. But then as soon as I zoom out, and once that connection's been made, you can see here I've just accidentally messed that up. And that's, once I fix that, I'll usually go in and make this wireframe mode just to do one more double check, because usually if you've got it selected incorrectly in one place, there's a highly likely chance that you could have it selected in a place that you're not even capable of seeing from that view. So that's where I'll just hit F3 and swap to that wireframe view mode. Once all's good, then I can go in and just finally make this last connection here, connect it down, and pull this out. Now I can just go in from the side and just make sure that it's still all working correctly. We've got a little bit of an inconsistency here where the vertices are being pulled in, so I'm going to fix that next. Now I'm just trying to keep a little bit of that kind of roundness happening. But once again, I still am not happy with how this is terminating here, because we've got such a long stretched four-sided polygon, and it's just not producing the result I was completely after. So I'll just take a look at it for a second. And what I might do is pull this in so it's not sticking out so much. Now I'm going to have a think. I might just play with adding some hardness to this edge here. Zoom out and take a look how that is. And it doesn't look too bad. I'm just not really happy with the curvature of this piece here. So we've got another problem here where there's a triangle. So before I go in and just do the very easy solution in terms of just adding another loop up here, I'm just having a quick think about the different ways in which I can terminate this. So you can see I can either push this down here and then here and just see how that unfolds. But then we end up with the triangle. Can potentially connect along here and redirect the flow of geometry this way, but then I don't think that's going to work either. It almost does. So as you can see, I'm almost falling into the trap of just not being able to work on the mesh without explaining what I'm doing. And that's just because as I'm going and coming across these things, I'm seeing that there's always something to learn in terms of what I'm doing, and it's very difficult to just sit down and model and kind of expect you guys to follow along exactly. So you can see what I'm doing here is I'm eliminating that triangular pinch by going in and adding another edge loop. So now that just flows in at the expense, obviously, of needing another edge loop to put in. But it's little details like that that can make all the difference. It also gives me two triangles to work with here. So now I've got some more options in terms of how I want to continue the edge loop flow around this particular area. Now the only thing I want to do here is I'm just not happy with how thick this piece is. So as usual, I can go in and add a connection and then just delete the kind of outside edge loops here. So you can see here, there's just a little pinch going on. So from underneath, I'm just going to take a look at why that's happening. And you can see here that it's because of these edge loops. I'm just going to pull these flat. And you can kind of get a feel for it as you're working on the mesh, removing pinches from all different angles. So you can see now we're not getting that weird kind of stretching, even though I do want to come in and fix this piece here. It's just looking a little bit hard. It doesn't actually take much effort to get things smoothing correctly. All you've got to do is look for those little bends and wobbles in the surface, and as you fix it from one angle, usually you'll be able to tell if there's a wobble on that different angle, and it kind of starts to work itself out. So they're starting to look quite nice now. You can see there's no weird wobbling in the surface. Everything's flowing nicely in here. The only thing that I'd probably like to fix is this geometry here. So one thing I'm going to try and do is, as usual, just add one more support loop down here. But in all honesty, things are getting a little bit it's hard to describe. Things are getting a little bit too one-dimensional in how things are flowing. I don't always like to use the easiest approach. Sometimes there's benefits to trying to figure out the low-res way of doing things. And at the moment, if I add too much geometry flowing down here, by the time I go and collapse this mesh at a higher subdivision, you'll see that we've got so much happening, and it's very hard to remove those edge loops once you're relying on them heavily flowing down in this direction. Whereas even though things aren't smoothing that perfectly, if I want to go in on the subdivided version and select all these polygons and turn that into some kind of circular inset, I should still be able to get away with it. So I'm just trying to also in general theory, I'm trying to avoid situations like too many edge loops flowing down in one direction when it's not fully necessary. So even though it doesn't look like the best topology, if I just take one more look at the smoothing, I can see there's a little bit of an issue here in that it's just not flowing as good as I want, but I have to make the judgment on whether or not that is good enough to actually work with. So I'm going to try one more thing to fix that. I'm just going to go in here and select these edges and pull them out, just so you can see at the moment they're not pulled out, and try and pay close attention here. You can see things look a little bit messy. So if I select those edges and pull them out a little bit, and now look at the highlight, it's running up and it's creating more of a clean, rounded shape that wasn't there before. Now also you can see this is pinching a little bit underneath here, and I want to introduce a bit of rounding to that as well. And it's not perfect, but I'm kind of doing as good a job as I can to minimize those weird highlights. So once again, I'm not paying attention to the topology at this point. I'm paying attention to these specular highlights running over the model. And once you master that ability of creating those highlights smoothly, then all your renders are going to look much cleaner, because you don't have to fake the reflection highlights. Usually that's why cars look so good, because they've been mathematically designed to have perfect, rounded corners and perfect soft kind of flowing angles, so that when the highlights flow over the surface, it's as clean as possible. And if you really want to go into understanding how that works, take a look at there's a couple of documentaries on Discovery Channel on how Ferrari do that and how they polish off the surface to be perfect. And what they do to visualize that is they reflect checker texture into the actual mesh. And that's a technique that a lot of 3D artists do as well. The reason I'm creating this little gap here is just to add a little bit of that sci-fi detailing. It's for no other purpose but that. So I'm just going to continue on refining some things here. I'm actually going to make an adjustment to this edge loop. But before I do that, I just want to go in and make sure that it's actually sorry, I'm just taking a look at it kind of from a different angle here, trying to see how this fits in. It's been a while since I've looked at that piece. And I can see straight away that I probably want to pull this piece in and under. And then just one by one, this is a little technique you'll see me do. I'll just unselect one piece, move the next one up, then unselect the next piece. And I'm trying to re-attain that kind of separation from piece to piece. So because I want to reshape this outer edge here, and that actually continues along, what I've got to do is I've got to go all the way down here and redirect the flow of that topology. So I'm just going to make a quick adjustment like that. Now I can select this edge loop separate from the others, and I'm just going to remove that. And then with it selected, I can just do a new chamfer on it, and I'm going to make it quite large. Now, because I am making this chamfer large, you'll see down the bottom here, we start to get a little bit of a crossover pinch. So that's where I'll go in and select the edge and just make sure that's not happening. And even though this edge loop here flows down and it doesn't continue up, I will continue that later. I'm just not exactly sure what I'm going to do with this kind of inside piece, so that's why I'm just leaving it just for now. But I am going to go in and give this some hardness. So you can see there's kind of some misalignment on this outside edge. I'm just going to go in and make sure that that's the same thickness all the way around. Once again, I'm just eyeballing these things. You can see the spacing issue here is quite apparent. So once again, I'm going to zoom in on this piece and just make sure that everything's kind of evenly distributed. And always remember that whenever I'm clicking and zooming in, I'm just hitting Z to do that. So it's important to note that if I hit Z with symmetry on, it will do it. It'll like lock the highlighted selection to the middle of the symmetry selection. So that's why you'll see me hit the tilde button or whatever you want to call it, and then hit Z to zoom in, because that doesn't work with symmetry on. So I always just turn that off and zoom in. So all these subtle little tweaks and stuff, like getting the edges to align a bit more cleanly, gives it that appearance of being a higher quality mesh. Even little things like down here, there's little bits of pinching, and I'm going to try and resolve those now. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start welding these pieces together. And this piece here, I'm going to actually change the directionality of that topology, connect a piece down here and slide it in. So part of the reason I go a bit slower is because as I'm trying to explain to you while I'm typing, obviously all that brain power is going towards trying to break down what I'm actually doing. So once you get into a bit of a rhythm, things become pretty repetitive and things start to move a lot faster. So by adding this second edge loop in here and not having it here, we're actually creating a little bit of a dissimilarity between those two. So I've just got to add the same topology to down here and then just refix things up a bit. You can see here we've got an edge loop that's kind of overlapping, so I'm just going to select that and scale it, which is my kind of fast way of fixing up little problems like that. I'm just going to create a little bit of distance here. So we're slowly working through and fixing up all these kind of connection issues. You can see here I'm just rounding this piece off, getting it to flow in a bit better. So you can see by adding those bevels there, we're creating a little bit more definition and kind of sci-fi, more of a pronounced shape on these bevels. It took me a little while to get there and figure out exactly where I wanted to add the bevels, but over time you just kind of figure out just through trial and error where you want them. So I'm just making sure there's no dodgy wobbling or anything like that. So from all angles I'm just kind of zooming around, trying to fix that type of stuff. So rather than keep this messy edge loop here, I've just decided I'm going to delete those polygons there and manually kind of clean that up. See, I'm just going to pull them down, and I'm pulling it down so I've got the same amount of edge loops so I can actually target weld in there, and that should clean off pretty nicely. So I'm just going to collapse this piece now. I'm pretty happy with where it's all heading. I'm going to take the symmetry off first. When I collapse that, I can just paste it back over the top. So now this is the first piece that's got more subdivisions in it. And I can start to work with some things here. I can start to bevel some edges. So I can go in here. And I'm actually going to remove this. But now I'm going to reconnect another edge loop in the center. And I can just play with extruding that. I'm going to select these two outside edges and just bevel those. And we start to create a little bit of a kind of more detailed edge there. Harden that edge off. So just before I do that, there's just a couple of things here that are looking a little bit wonky. So I'm going to select this here. And the beautiful thing is once you collapse the Turbo Smooth, you can easily go in and remove edge loops quite cleanly. So I can now select this entire group here. And if I want to, I can pull this out. And now I'm just going to go along and I'm going to remove that edge loop. So I'm just going to select this edge here, chamfer it in, scale it, and then I'm going to apply the regularize. So as I'm creating that circular inset, I'm just going to go in and around the surrounding support loop, just make some quick modifications to try and get that looking a little bit more smooth. That can sometimes just mean pulling some edges out. Okay, another thing I can do here is, so I'm just going to unhide everything. I'm going to make a small cut like so. You can see I've just cut that out. You can change this. It's quite important to get this right here. I'm going to make a cut just going back up like that. And then from the opposite angle, I'm going to continue that around like so. So when I made that cut, it will automatically select all those edges for me. So I'm just going to use the chamfer and just this is where it gets a little bit tricky. I'm just going to try and keep the continuity flowing around the edge. So you can see here we've got this kind of flowing up. I'm just going to pull this back and chamfer down here. What I'm doing is I'm trying to keep these triangles away from the surrounding support loop. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to be able to slide all the way up with edge constraint turned on here. And then just pull out slightly. And if I target weld these two pieces together, down the center here, the topology may seem messy, but because we're on a flat surface, it doesn't really have that much of an effect. So that's where I can just do the exact same thing here. Target world down here. And then the topology is looking a bit weird, but you can see the smooth, it's actually not that bad. So in here now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete those edges. Just scale this in. Now I'm going to shape for that, like so. And we've created this nice, cool inset very quickly, very cleanly. Everything's still quads. And you can start to add that detail that you're after. Okay, so once again, I'm going to add another circular inset here, and I'm just going to slide this out first because I want to make sure that the polygons are as square as possible. I'm just eyeballing the scale here, but and then the same here. You can see as I'm sliding that down, we're removing that kind of a shaped pinch that's happening. So I'll always do that to some degree. Now with this piece here, I'm just going to actually go in, select these inside edge loops, and just make sure that the indents of a similar kind of scale. You can see here things are a little bit off. So I'll just remove this. I'm going to make a connection like so. Same thing, I can just remove that edge loop and then reconnect. If this isn't exactly the same, you can just go in and just scale it a little bit, and then you can see on the outside though, if I just zoom to that, we've got a little bit of a kind of misalignment there that I'm just going to pull this out. Alright, so there's a little bit of detail I want to show you how to create here. Just very quickly, I can select these two edges and do a chamfer on them, like so. Now when I pull this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this inside edge loop. Now from side on, I can pull that down, like so. Now I just want to select these outside edge loops and chamfer them, giving the appearance of these two cut lines. So this is where you'll start to see that adding in all this small detail is the quickest part of the creation process. But obviously when you do create an edge loop like that, you want to make sure that things are kind of balanced, so you can pull this up. You also want to make sure this inside piece is as square as possible. So I'm going to pull that out. And then lastly, I'm just going to connect through here. So there's a support loop. And it ends up rounding a bit more clean. Okay, on this side I can do something slightly different. I'm going to connect up here, just down the center like so. I'm going to delete these edge loops. Just making sure that that's kind of, yeah, that should be good enough. But now I've got to make sure that these are even and in line, so I'm going to pull those down until they're flat. And the goal here is to create a little inset, like a little panel in between these two, you know, little, how can you call them? Little insets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bridge those two polygons, and on this polygon here I can now cap them. Now at this point I probably need to go in and add another edge loop in between here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect down the center, and I'm going to connect the sides. And this is where I like to use that method where I connect two and then just remove the outside loop. And this loop here, I just need to make a connection down. Like so. And now it just smooths back. So I'm just cleaning some of these remaining loops up. So you'll see in a second what I'm going to do is I'm going to target weld these up here and then target weld these together and remove this polygon here, leaving a four-sided polygon. That smooths really nicely. You can see we've got a tiny bit of pinching happening. So I can go in if I want to and make a connection across here. And I can target weld these. I'm going to make another circular inset up here, making sure that I don't have edge constraint turned on. I should probably get in the habit, because that happens a little bit too often, I should get in the habit of looking up here to make sure. So you can see at the moment, I can go to edit geometry and take a look at the constraint, and it's on. So I know that when that's on, and if I go to regularize that, you can see it's only going to be able to snap that circular inset to the same normal alignment as like what the polygon selection currently is. So if I turn that off and then redo it, you'll see it'll be a little bit off in the scale, but that's what I'm after. And now I can just kind of do the same exact thing as I did over there. So the same connect we made along here, I'm just taking a look and I'm just going to see where I can add another one of those connections. Except this time I think I want to do it at a different angle. So I'm going to connect it up like so, and then just follow that through underneath. So I'm just preparing to create another one of those circular insets. So I'm just connecting the geometry that I'm going to use. So you can see from this angle, as I pull that in, I'm creating a little bit more distance so that we don't get that overlap happening as obvious. Okay, next piece. I'm going to collapse this one now at 1. I'm going to turn off the symmetry as usual, collapse it down, and then paste again. So the difference is here I've created some topology to work with, but I've probably got a little bit too much. So this is where you need to be a little bit more conservative and make sure you've got your edge loops in the right places. So the same inset piece I did there, I can do to this one. Just going to pull that in. And then chamfer like so. I'm going to select this inside loop and delete it. Just making some cleaning. So even though I've collapsed these main pieces and you can see the topology is more high res, now I've got a better opportunity for this inside piece to work with it and get that fitting in. So one thing I didn't like that was happening on this piece here is this kind of inside bevel. So I'm just going to completely clear that and then move everything up to fit. I'm also going to go in here and fix this up. just going to give these pieces a separate color. And the reason I'm going to do that is just so I can get a bit more of a feel for how they're splitting up the different areas of the mesh. When everything's all one color, it becomes a little bit harder to distinguish like the thickness of pieces. And it's quite important that all these white bits are similar size. But there's just some rough stuff happening here, so I can just get rid of these edge loops. So I'm just creating some distance here also. I'm going to connect two edges along here, and I'm going to create a little bit more detail on this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edge I just created and rotate it with edge constraint turned on. You can see up here edge constraint is turned on, and I'm just going to create like a little panel. So the reason I'm rotating these in like so is because I'm going to kind of pull out and then connect down there. And then I'm just going to pull these out. So now what I can do is I can select this shape here, chamfer it, basically select all these inside faces with the edge constraint turned off and just pull it down. Now I'm going to do a connect with two subdivisions, and we're just creating a little bit of detail like that into the mesh. Now on this inside piece, I can create a circular shape out of that. And maybe make a little bit slightly different detail. So on here, I'm going to make 2 connections down the center. Then I'll make another couple of connections. With all of this kind of selected, I'm just going to pull this down a bit. And I'm just experimenting, but I don't think that looks too good. So I can get rid of those edge loops. So you can see we're slowly getting there. I'm just kind of adding details as I see. Here's another cool little way I handle situations like this. So you can see I've done what I did previously with this bevel coming in here. But what I'm going to do this time is to speed things up, is I'm going to bridge the two. Then I'm going to select the border on the outside. I'm going to cap that border. Then I'm going to apply a chamfer. And using Alt, because without it, it goes a little bit too hard, I'm just sliding out here. We end up with the ability to create some nice kind of four-sided topology very easily. So all I've got to do is target weld those points. Let's just pull this in a bit. And without any work at all, we end up with a nice bevel there. If you want, sometimes like to smooth this in just to create a little bit more of a rounded kind of inset going on here. So I'm going to continue the same inset bevel that we've got going on here around this inside piece. And in order to do that, I just first need to connect an edge loop down the center. But I can also see an opportunity here to just fix up one last little pinch. So now that continues around the whole thing. I'm not sure if I want to add a circular inset here, so I'm just going to have a crack at it, and then I can always undo it if it's not looking very good. Yeah, I don't think I like it. So I'm going to collapse this piece down now, slowly getting there. So to clean up a couple of pieces, I'm just going to bring these up and then remove the support loop. So as you can see, once I collapse the mesh, the first thing I start doing is removing the unneeded edge loops. So just kind of looking from different views. You can see by removing that loop, we've created more shape and more kind of highlight there. So there's just some immediate things you can do. Now I'm going to try and get rid of this edge, but then I'm going to go back in and connect it. Create more kind of a razor sharp edge, which will give it a more metallic appearance. So I'm going to try and add some detail in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these edges up like so, even though they're going to terminate a little bit weird there. I can connect along here and get rid of these wonky edges. Now I can get rid of these edges, and you can see we've got the topology flowing up. Just going from side on, I'm just going to make sure that there's not any pinching. I'm just going to pull these in like so. Won't always work. Alright guys, I'm just recording this to let you know that this first part of lesson 10 I'm going to break off now before the video gets to the 2-hour mark, because I found that going over that can introduce problems with the rendering stage, and also our internet here in Australia is really terrible, so we've got a very slow upload speed, at least where we are in our current location. So we need to move as soon as possible because we've actually got the fastest internet available in the area. And what happened last time is the 3-hour lesson, it would get 2 hours into the upload, and then I'd start having issues with it timing out, or Vimeo was crashing, or just general problems happen over that 3-hour period that were preventing me from getting it fully uploaded in time. So I'm going to try and fix that on lesson 9 tomorrow, and I'll get the next hour of this lesson up for you guys, which goes in and finalizes the final details on the rest of the mesh.